I mean, I've been a supporter of Quins all my life. I grew up not far from the Stoop, although I live quite a lot further away now. And I've been a season ticket member for more than 10 years. So I've followed the club through the hard times, which, you know, look on the positive side, we saw some different grounds to the usual ones. And through the great times, you know, I was there when we won the Prem, you know, a few years ago, which was amazing. And I mean, the Stoop for me is home. It's another home. It feels like a family, genuinely, particularly being a member of the group of people around me have become like family.
So I've sort of been a Quins fan for many years. My dad used to take me to the Stoop when I was sort of much younger in my sort of teenage years. And sort of through sort of work, I sort of lost contact with sort of rugby, having to work sort of a lot of weekends and sort of Friday night shifts. So didn't get a chance to go to the Stoop. But for my first year anniversary present, my boyfriend back then bought us a ticket to go and watch Harlequins versus Saracens, which was an absolutely great match where we sort of won it in the last 2 minutes. But we also became sort of season ticket holders the next season. As one of the things we sort of really noticed when we sort of came to the Stoop was very much it's a feeling of a collective of people who are there to enjoy rugby. It doesn't matter who you are, as long as you're behind your team, enjoying the day. That's what it's all about. And it was sort of a place that it was comfortable to hold my partner's hand in a public place, which I never thought was going to be sort of something you could do in a sporting environment. And then I've sort of been very lucky to sort of work with the Met Police in and around Southwest London. So I've sort of made sure that we can sort of link in our neighbourhood teams with the Harlequins, and very much around sort of LGBT Pride and History Month, making sure that our advisors are there just to be part of the community and sort of build those effective relationships.
So I think when it was announced, it was a massive boost to my confidence that I'd have a safe place. I wouldn't have to give up something that I love doing. I love coming to the Stoop. I love coming to see Harlequins play, and it meant I felt that the club was behind me. So for me, that was amazing. And then I guess on the day, I mean, the first thing I remember, it was really wet, and I was really annoyed because I've got some lovely trainers I bought which had my Trans Pride laces in them. And I was really annoyed that I was going to get them wet and messed up. But it was just, even with that atrocious weather, it was just such a great atmosphere. And I guess the biggest moment for me, I think, was when I got to my seat. I always get there really early because it's quite a long drive for me. Was coming to my seat. Our steward was there, Tom. My friend was with me, who I drive down with, who lives not far from me, who's also called Thomas. There's some sort of link there. And to find I had the rainbow flag with the Harlequins logo on it at my seat, I just felt a real sense of being at home even more than I ever had before. And that was amazing. And then all the things that went on that day, there were some things on the video screens with some of our LGBTQ plus players talking on the video screens. It just gave a message to me that this was still my home and this was still where I could be me and it would be okay.
As a sort of Quins fan, I think there was sort of a sort of huge sense of pride that the Harlequins were really sort of owning sort of visibility of having an LGBT Pride event, supporting its Pride membership, who I think in rugby, after the sort of unfortunate sort of comments from Israel Folau sort of just before in the previous year, had probably sort of worried some LGBT supporters in regards to rugby of actually how vocal someone within the rugby family is sort of being homophobic, and actually what does this mean? And actually Harlequins really owning the issue, being proud, sort of showing that it supports its LGBT sort of fans and community, was really empowering and actually challenging the other Premiership rugby teams to sort of up their game and sort of run their own sort of Pride events, or be more aware of actually what are we doing for our LGBT community, how are we linking in with them and making them feel like it's a safe space. And it was interesting to hear the sort of history of sort of gay rugby teams with the King's Cross Steelers, the great things that have sort of been achieved, and actually how sport really unites people. It takes away the difference because you focus on that common goal of being a team working together. So it was just a really exciting day, and then to sort of be able to sort of come along and represent the local community through the police service was sort of really great as well. It was a really engaging experience. It sort of enabled sort of the LGBT network to show how far the Met Police had come in terms of supporting its own LGBT sort of staff and officers, supporting the community, but actually sort of being able to answer some really sort of open questions. But just actually the interest and support that sort of came through from sort of the members who were present at the day supporting what we were doing. And just the amount of sort of families sort of coming forward really sort of wanted to know what we were doing, how we were supporting the community. And I think also for sort of their children challenging the perception of who you have to be a police officer, seeing those positive, real role models was sort of a really great experience.
I think, I mean, particularly the people who were around me, I think given my news was relatively new news at the time, I think it gave them an ability to talk about my situation and their broader thoughts on inclusion and really demonstrate that you know, we talk about it a lot. Everyone says, oh, rugby's everybody's game, and there are a lot of slogans and things that fly around, but they really put that into action. I think it gave them a reason to initiate a conversation, to talk with me, and just to ask for some of my experiences. And yeah, there were a few people who were saying, so, you know, when are we going to see the real you? And you know, I don't think they would have asked me that outright. I think it was a conversation opener, and again, it was just a real feeling of, it was sort of, you know, despite the weather, it was a real sort of carnival family atmosphere, and it put into action the words that we talk about inclusivity and family and this being for everybody. And yeah, I just think it gave people a space to talk. And you know, I would probably have forced it, if I'm honest. Later on, I'd have made people listen, and I'd have initiated the conversations. So it's quite nice sometimes not to be the one initiating those conversations.
I think we did, especially sort of around people who were sort of coming with their families, because I think by being so open and LGBT inclusive, it allowed people to start talking about sort of the LGBT community. And I suppose it not sort of being a hidden topic or something that you wouldn't normally say, potentially speak to your sort of kids about. Actually, it's sort of saying, actually, this is a day to celebrate sort of the LGBT community, sort of having those positive role models and sort of ambassadors. And it was really interesting to see how supportive the sort of Harlequins and rugby fans were on Twitter. There was sort of a lot of sort of what some people term as sort of banter comments initially when the Pride match was sort of launched, in terms of we're becoming the Harlequins, etc. But it was really interesting to see how quickly fans came across to support sort of members and sort of challenge that behaviour. And I suppose those conversations possibly wouldn't have happened, or people sort of wouldn't have actually seen some of the challenges the community faced unless these sort of events are sort of held, conversations are sort of raised. But I think some people were so empowered, and I always think whenever you do anything with Pride, it's always a sense of celebration. It's an exciting day, it's a fun day, it's an inclusive day where everyone is sort of comfortable to be their true selves, and I think that's what comes across.
I think probably when the players ran out at the start of the game and we had the Pride flags waving and the Pride flags emblazoned with the Harlequin, I have to say that was really quite emotional to see that happening. And I will say this because Nick picked up on the sort of background to where this all happened with the Israel Folau nonsense. What I really strongly remember about that incident was how quickly Joe Marler stepped up and just knocked that nonsense on its back. And I felt like we were also not only celebrating our community, but we were really honouring players who stepped up and said, that's not okay. And I think that's probably why I felt quite emotional at that point. And yeah, that'll stick with me forever, to be honest.
You know, we've been very fortunate of a club to have some very prolific and visible allies, Chris Robshaw, as you said, Joe Marler, who really have used their platform to support many areas of inclusive rugby. And it's wonderful that they stand up for that belief. So we're very thankful that they're part of the club. Nick, what about yourself? Is there a moment on the day that sort of strikes you as something very memorable?
I think it's exactly the same as sort of Emily has sort of said. It's when you see the players running out, you've got the pride flags being waved, you've got the sort of King's Cross Steelers sort of welcoming the players onto the sort of pitch. It sort of was a great sort of sense of sort of pride in the team, pride in the event that was happening, and recognising some of sort of the great players that we've had within the Quins that really support the community. Sort of obviously mentioned Joe Marler, Chris Robshaw does sort of great things, especially attending Pride every year and sort of linking in with different teams, and sort of James Haskell and his sort of constant sort of positive messaging in and around the LGBT community. So I think it sort of brought it together and just reinforced to me it was the sort of the Quins and the Stoop is a safe space, a place that sort of me and my partner really love coming to. And actually we sort of now feel more included more than we ever did before within being part of the Quins family, and that's sort of really sort of powerful.
And I talked about the fact we are the first, and I think so far the only club to have done this, and how amazing it was. And what I'll say is the conversation went into people's surprise that sport in general, I think, but rugby almost in particular, was so open to having such an event, because I think unfairly rugby's got a bit of a reputation for being a bit of a sort of boys' club, and Harlequins has got an old reputation for being the city gents and all of the stuff that comes with that. And I think it opened a really positive discussion that said that's not what rugby is about anymore. Rugby's not like that, hasn't been like that for years. And I was able to talk. I used to, in my playing days, I used to ground share with the Steelers when they were relatively new. So I was able to share how attitudes have absolutely changed in that period of time. But I'm so incredibly proud. We were the first and so far the only club to do this. I think that speaks volumes for us. Really proud. I'm desperate to get back. It's been a very long time, and it wasn't long after that match. I know it might have been one of the. Was it the last match? It might have been the penultimate match before we had lockdown. So I'm desperate to get back, and desperate to meet my friends as the authentic me. That's really important. I've got a lot of supporters of me who are also supporters of the club from social media, who I know will have my back on that first day. I'm still really nervous. I would be really honest. It's going to be an interesting experience. It always is, going back to familiar places, sort of post-transition. I'm interested to try and work out where the ladies' toilets are. That's something I never really found out before. So, yeah, I can't wait to get back. I've been watching on YouTube. I've been watching both the men's and the women's teams. And that's been fabulous. It's been great that we've had some rugby to watch, and it's been great to be able to support. And I like the fact that you can sort of go in the chat window and you can be vocal there. But nothing matches sitting in my seat, E194, cheering and screaming, and I can't wait to get back.
Very similar. I can't wait to be back. I was sort of lucky to go to the sort of match just after lockdown sort of one, when it was sort of a very limited amount, and it was just great to see the excitement of people back. And I think one of the real interesting things with the Harlequins is when you sort of look at the membership and those who attend regularly, quite often you've got sort of older members of the community who actually probably coming down to see the rugby on a Saturday or a Sunday, meeting up with their friends, having that chance to have a talk is actually sort of a real need for them to sort of actually be able to link in with people, actually talk to someone and have a meaningful conversation about something you enjoy. And it will be great to sort of have people back. I think it will also be great to have a sort of another Pride event, because having sort of no actual Pride events last year apart from online, there's that sort of real sense to want to get back out, celebrate, and actually be with people. I think it's great to have online events, but they just don't have the same sort of feeling or sort of connection with people. So yeah, no, it'd be sort of great to be back.
I guess inevitably from my perspective, I've got to raise the spectre of trans inclusion in sport and in rugby in particular. It's been a tough year. The World Rugby guidance that came out around transgender athletes in sport, that was really worrying, because it wasn't based on very good science. And although I'm not actually an England fan, I support Scotland. That's my home country. I was thrilled to see how the RFU responded to that and said that they would be guided by some genuine science. I think for any of us who are rugby players or rugby fans, one of the obvious points about rugby is if you look in a team, the diversity of shapes and sizes of people playing. I played second row. It's a really sucky thing when you're a trans woman to be a second row with a second row physique. But to sort of say that all of a sudden, because I've transitioned, I'm suddenly a candidate for the Harlequins women's first 15, the absurdity of that would be obvious to anyone who met me. So I think that's a frontier that rugby needs to, I think, to a certain extent, put its money where its mouth is. If sport is for everyone, it's also for transgender athletes. And we've got to get across this ridiculous notion that a cisgender male rugby player, professional, would suddenly declare themselves female simply to shine in women's rugby, or vice versa, and that's an absurdity. So I'd like to see more done to tackle that sort of prejudice and duff science, frankly. So yeah, I think for me it's a lot on the trans agenda. I think from a broader agenda, and I'm not just trans. I would like to see more of what we've done in terms of the broader community acceptance within the game. And yeah, to Nick's point, seeing professional players feel safe enough that they can come out without it being a big deal, because it's a big deal for us personally and emotionally inside, but for society it shouldn't be anyone's problem, business, or concern. We should just be happy that people can be who they are, can love who they want to love, without that attracting comment from anyone else. So yeah, I hope that can be the case. I sense that is more likely to come in the shorter term than trans inclusion, but it's we're all in it together within the LGBTQ community, and Quins has really demonstrated that.
So I think there's a lot to be done around trans inclusion, as was mentioned, sort of even looking at sort of stadium design, of moving to a stage where there's gender neutral bathrooms, having more support, I suppose, when we have Pride events, of really supporting the trans community who sort of are going through a real hard time now with sort of rollbacks in legislation, problems caused by lockdown, and sort of access to sort of gender identity clinics, hormones, etc. Really supporting actually the trans part of our community, which often I sort of feel can sometimes be sidelined or not focused on as much as they need. And if it wasn't two trans ladies of colour in New York throwing the first brick in Stonewall riots, we wouldn't be where we are today. So actually really supporting the trans community within the LGBT community. I think it's also just continuing to raise the profile of inclusive rugby across the other Premiership teams, very much getting them to sort of step up to the mark. It would be great to sort of have a player come out who identifies as either sort of gay or bisexual, to be that visible role model. And I think also having a certain amount of protection for our women's teams, because quite often there's homophobic comments thrown towards female players that because you're a woman who plays rugby, you must be a lesbian. Well, actually, that's not true. And that's actually putting off inclusive female rugby because of the homophobia thrown towards that. So I think it's supporting all parts of the LGBT and continuing the great work that the Harlequins have started.
So for us at Harlequins, the legacy of the game is very important to us to sort of make sure it's sort of not a one-time thing. It's very much integrated in to the fabric of who we are, but within that, to make sure that the needs and wants and perceptions of our supporters from the LGBTQ plus community are heard and can be amplified. So I'm delighted to tell you both that Harlequins are going to become the first professional rugby club to launch an LGBTQ plus supporters association.
Yeah, no, I'd be really happy to support that, because it's one of the things you see sort of happening in football teams, and it's about making that safe, inclusive space, and actually sort of bringing in the community who might not feel able to sort of be out in front of sort of other fans, etc., providing that safe space and sort of contacts and networks. Absolutely great idea, and would be delighted to support.
They're important because they, I've used the expression before, they put the club's money where its mouth is. The club can say that it's an inclusive place. Anyone can say they're inclusive or we don't need this. But all I can say for somebody who came out late in life and was terrified to do so for 40 something years, demonstrating that somewhere is a safe place and demonstrating that somewhere I've considered family is still family. You can't do that by just saying it. You've got to do it. You have to be active. And the Pride match was that, being active. And I think my fear at returning as my authentic self and being open about who I am has almost evaporated as a result of the Pride match. Had that not happened, the trepidation of that walk across the footbridge of the A316, I could imagine myself having a panic attack. So that's genuinely that's what happens. That's what this makes happen. That's the difference this has made for me.
I would sort of point out the fact that unfortunately in 70 countries across the world, it's still a criminal offence to be your true self and love the person you choose. And tragically in 7 of those countries, the death penalty is still actively used. As sort of an LGBT activist, I would love to get to a point where we don't have to have Pride events to a certain extent, where communities were sort of fully integrated and the barriers that LGBT people face not be there. But unfortunately, we're not at that stage, and it's raising that awareness. It's bringing people with us to show the effective barriers we face that will help overcome those. So yeah, I think until we're at a level playing field, there's always going to be a need to have a Pride event and actually celebrate how far we've come.
The role sport plays in influencing society and the platform it has. I believe Nelson Mandela once said that sport has the power to change the world. And, it's something that unifies so many, and it does have an ability to evoke an inclusive societal message.